It's Flashcards Friday, and I'm Gabrielle Burchak, your host. Today, I'm going to return to the topic of the Sun Dagger, which was Tuesday's podcast, where a blade of light became a calendar. And in this podcast, we ask what that kind of patience that the ancient Puebloans had can teach us now. But first, a quick word from my advertisers. Tuesday's episode on the Sun Dagger shows how a community of ancestral Puebloans across generations created a calendar etched into stone. What makes that story so powerful is that it was not built by one person or one moment, but through shared observation, patience, and community. On the Fajada Butte, the ancestral Puebloans did not begin by explaining the sun. They did not start with a theory, a diagram, or a declaration of meaning. They began by watching light move across stone. They listened to those who had watched before them. And only after generations did explanation emerge in the form of the Sun Dagger. And this order matters more than we realize. We often imagine science as something that begins with talking, with hypotheses, with explanations, with someone standing up and saying, "Here's how the world works." But that's not the case. If the Sun Dagger teaches us anything, it is that science does not begin with explaining. Science begins with watching and advances through listening. The ancestral Puebloans did not rush to meaning. They did not assume the sky would reveal itself on command. Instead, they practiced patience. They observed how light shifted across the stone day after day, year after year. They noticed what repeated and what changed. They held that knowledge collectively, passing it from one generation to the next. Only then did explanation become possible. The sequence of watching, listening, and explaining is not just ancient science. It is good science. It is also a good human practice. Today, we tend to reverse the order by explaining first, speaking quickly, and then forming conclusions after a single data point, a single conversation experience, or worse yet, a clickbait headline. We feel the silence before the pattern has had time to emerge. But the Sun Dagger reminds us that understanding anything deeply requires restraint. And this restraint is the process by which we understand science. First by watching, then by listening, and finally by explaining. So we watch, listen, and then explain. Watching means observing without immediately interpreting. It means noticing what happens repeatedly, not just what happens once. The Sun Dagger did not respond to a single sunrise. It responded to patterns that revealed themselves slowly through consistent observation. This method quiets our minds and anchors us in quiet revelation. Listening comes next because no one observes everything on their own. The knowledge embedded in the Sun Dagger was not the insight of one person standing on a butte. It was the product of shared attention. Elders remembered what younger eyes had not yet seen. Stories preserved data long before notebooks existed. Listening allowed the community to correct errors, refine understanding, and maintain continuity. Only after watching and listening did the explanation emerge. And when it did, it was stable enough to guide an entire community through the years. Now, let's ground this in something concrete. In modern science, one of the most common errors is drawing conclusions from insufficient observation. A single experimental result can be misleading, and two results can still be a coincidence. This is why replication matters, why sample size matters, why peer review exists, and why synchronizing consistent data matters. A classic example appears in early medical research. For decades, specific treatments were assumed to work because they seemed effective in small or short-term studies. Only when researchers slowed down, gathered larger data sets, and listened to conflicting results did they realize some widely accepted practices were ineffective or even harmful. The mistake was not a lack of intelligence, it was a lack of patience. Explaining too soon feels productive, it feels decisive. But without sufficient observation, explanation becomes speculation, masquerading as certainty. The Sun Dagger would never have existed if its builders had explained the sun's movement after a single season. The alignment only works because someone resisted the urge to declare meaning before the pattern had revealed itself. Science still works in the same way. Let's bring this closer to daily life. This framework applies just as strongly to how we understand other people. How often do we explain someone's behavior before truly observing it? How often do we decide why someone acted a certain way without listening to their history, their context, or their own explanation? We see one interaction and conclude, that person is difficult. We hear one sentence and conclude, they don't care. We experience one moment of tension and explain it as intent rather than circumstance. But people reveal themselves through patterns, not snapshots. Understanding another human, or even an animal, requires watching how they show up over time. It requires listening, not just to what they say, but to what they repeat, what they prioritize, what they avoid, and what they carry quietly. Only then does explanation become understanding rather than projection. The ancestral Puebloans did not impose meaning on the land, but rather they listened to it. They did not force the stone to conform to their expectations. They learned its rhythms and responded with care. That same humility applies to human relationships. Explanation alone, without watching or listening, is a method of assertion, whereas watching and listening create a community of valuable, shared knowledge. So why does this matter? This is not about slowing down for the sake of slowness. It's about accuracy. It's about respect. It's about building knowledge that lasts. The Sun Dagger worked because it aligned with reality, not because it tried to dominate it. It respected natural limits. It accepted uncertainty. It waited. In a world that rewards instant reactions, the discipline of waiting feels almost radical, but it is also deeply practical. By watching first, we prevent error. By listening second, we prevent arrogance. And finally, by explaining, we prevent harm. This order protects science from flawed conclusions. It protects relationships from lack of communication and misunderstanding. It protects communities from fracture. And it reminds us that knowledge is not something we extract from the world. It is something we build with it. So, what can we take away from the methods used to create the Sun Dagger? First, watch. Patterns matter more than moments. Don't mistake a single event for a conclusion. Real understanding comes from observing what repeats over time. The Sun Dagger did not respond to a single sunrise or season. It emerged from years of noticing slow, predictable shifts. In daily life, this means pausing before reacting to first impressions, emotional spikes, or isolated data points. Watch long enough for a pattern to reveal itself before you decide what it means. Second, listen, because knowledge is built collectively, not alone. Observation becomes insight only when it is shared and tested against other perspectives. The Sun Dagger was not the achievement of one observer, but of a community that listened across generations. In practice, listening means seeking context before judgment and allowing others to add what you cannot see on your own. Whether in science, work, art, or relationships, understanding deepens when you treat knowledge as something refined together rather than claimed individually. Finally, third, explain, because meaning should emerge, not be forced. Explanation is the most reliable when it comes last. The ancestral Puebloans did not impose meaning on the sky. They let meaning emerge from repeated observation and shared understanding. In modern life, explaining too early often creates certainty without accuracy. When you wait to explain until patterns are clear and voices are heard, your conclusions are more precise, more humane, and more likely to endure. Science did not begin with equations on paper. It started with attention, patience, humility, and community. The ancestral Puebloans did not just observe the sky. They understood it by watching together, listening across generations, and allowing meaning to emerge slowly. So, when we feel the urge to explain something immediately, let's remember the development of the Sun Dagger. It endured because the people watched first, listened second, and explained last. That is how understanding survives time. Thank you for listening to Math, Science, History. And until next time, carpe diem.